Thanks again for coming back, or maybe it's your first visit to the Building HVAC Science Podcast. We're out here trying to help create better, more knowledgeable HVAC and building performance technicians by helping these two professions better understand each other with the ultimate goal of making customers happy in the homes they live in and the buildings they work in. Doing a good job, it's very important. Striving for excellence, very important. Paying attention to changes, never getting stuck. I think that's some of the themes that we hear today. And when Eric and I interview Thomas Huff, Hoffmaster, where he discusses his experiences from transitioning from a technician to tech support and eventually into training and consulting. He's building a business out of frustration for the status quo. Hear that over and over and over again. He's got a great passion for teaching and positively impacting the industry. And this led him to pursue freelance training and consulting, focusing on improving skills across the HVAC workforce. He's doing a great job, just started with a YouTube channel. Link is in the show notes for that. And he's trying to fill in gaps, things that you're not going to hear about, things you might not have encountered or run into before. He talks about installation issues, best practices, correct adjustments to meet site specifications, and broadening your mind or your outlook to all these. And he really delves into addressing root cause issues rather than just the symptoms. So let's get into this episode where Eric and I interview Thomas Hoffmaster II, also known as Huff, where he's into breaking the cycle, Huff's journey to HVAC excellence and industry change.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Building HVAC Science Podcast. Eric here, Bill Spohn over there. With us today, our special guest, Thomas Huff Hoffmaster II. Huff, welcome to the show. And how are you doing? What are you doing? And what's going on? We're just going to throw everything right out there in the front.
Right out there, just right off the get-go. That's not much of a ramp up.
No, that's like a wall.
Yeah, it's like NHRA top fuel kind of thing here. I'm doing great. I appreciate that. And what am I doing? You ever been a part in your life where you're like, I'm not exactly sure? In April of 2023, I was working for York Factory Direct, doing tech support, leading the tech support team for the Northeast. And man, you ever just get that feeling where it's time to make a change? It just really felt that it was that time and that moment. And I'm someone that likes to make a difference in people's lives and very involved in the community. So a lot of people know I'm a bivocational pastor, been that for 18 years. I like making a difference. I love the training aspect. I always enjoyed being in the training room. And I just felt like there was a lot of people out here who needed help. And I've seen it a lot on job sites, but sometimes could not address it or couldn't help it or all those kind of things that go along. And so I told them I wanted to leave. So they asked me to help with the transition. So this summer was about my end of my tenure there. I still do some training stuff as a contractor for them. And so now I'm freelancing, doing training, and helped build a training program and a lab for a company in Sterling, Virginia. That's what I'm finishing up now. I'm on contract there until the end of October. So staying busy at it and really enjoying. Finally feel free for a while. It's not tied to a bunch of chaos.
So how did you get started in HVAC?
It's one of those things where you've always been around it. So my dad, my uncles, all of those guys were mainly sheet metal guys in the sheet metal trade. My uncles mainly did residential sheet metal, and my dad was a commercial guy, hated residential. He would take me sometimes down on the weekends if he had something he needed to do. I'd go with him. This is before OSHA had that sharp, keen eye, if you know what I'm saying. This was a long time ago, and I'd go on job sites with him. He would have plans rolled out on the table. We lived in a really small house, poor little family in West Virginia, and we didn't have a lot of room. And he'd have these blueprints of these big commercial buildings all rolled out on the table. And he'd had colored pencils. I don't know if anybody even remembers what those things were. And he would be shading things in because he liked visuals. My dad was like kind of a visual guy. And so I'm like, what are you doing, Pops? And he would show me stuff. And he'd show me how to draw these fittings and why placing the numbers on the cheek versus the runner was important and all these different things. And so when I got out of high school, I was going to go in the military, but had back issues and that went away. And so sheet metal it is. But I like the service guys. The service guys had nicer vehicles. They had air conditioning in their vans. Sheet metal guys, they had trucks with no AC. They had uniforms. I'm like, I want to do that. And our high school had an agricultural program that called Ag Mechanics. And I went through that all 4 years of high school where we learned electrical, hydraulics. It's amazing what farmers know, right? And I was on a job site as a sheet metal guy, and a service guy was struggling to find a short. And I said, well, let me take a look. I got his meter and quickly identified the short, and my life changed that moment. People realized that I could figure things out, and so I ended up in service.
You couldn't go into the military because of a bad back, and instead of you chose the HVAC trade.
I didn't say it made sense, Eric. There's nothing about this that makes sense. It's just, at the time, I graduated in 1990. And so at the time, the military wasn't ramping up. Matter of fact, they were scaling down. And so if you had any issue going on, they did, even though I scored really high on the pre-ASVAB and all that, they just like, nope. So yeah, somebody should have told me at that point, hey, the military doesn't want you because of your spine issue. You might not want to go into this, but nobody told me anything like that. So here I am.
It sounds like you've done pretty well. How did you transition from being a technician into tech support? Because that's, having done that myself, that's a challenging transition to make. How did that go for you?
It is. In 2007, I had been at Whitman Mechanical for roughly, 12, 13 years, something like that. And honestly, my aim wasn't necessarily to go into tech support. It was the owner was going to sell the company and wanted me to be one of the new owners, but I had to take on the two partners that were senior to me. And I just didn't want to do that. Nothing against those guys. It just didn't feel like it fit for my family. And somebody turned me on to the guy who was running tech support for Carrier, like, hey, he's looking for somebody. And being a service manager, you do a lot of troubleshooting over the phone with your technicians. So I talked to him, and I wasn't sure I could do the job, to be quite honest with you. And I'll never forget this guy. This guy's name is Tom Windmiller. I'm still friends with him to this day. He's a mentor to me. And he said, Huff, I know what company you come from. You got a good name. You can do this job. It's going to be a transition. It's going to be difficult. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to throw stuff across the office. You're going to do all those things. But I promise you, if you stick with it, you can make a good life for yourself and preserve your body a little longer. So I was like, okay. And I took the job, and I was with Carrier for 11 years. Matter of fact, when Tom Windmiller ended up going to the factory as a regional director, I ended up taking his spot. I ended up running tech support, ended up assuming another region for Carrier Enterprise. At that point, they had already did the Wasco merger. And so I had about, 12 guys working for me, and we did VRF startups. And then York come along and asked me to come over and build a smaller team. And I'm like, smaller sounds good. I was getting a little burned out. But the transition is difficult. It's one thing to help a guy troubleshoot over the phone that you know. You know this guy, he works for you. You kind of learn his quirks. You learn what he can and can't do. And you kind of know how to direct him a little better. At least that's in my experience. But then you do tech support. You're talking to guys you don't know. Over time, they become repeat customers, so to speak, or repeat offenders, depending on how you look at it. Right?
Oh.
It's always a running joke with my buddies. And you get to know some of those guys and you get to know them. But for the most part, a lot of times you're taking calls from guys you really don't know that well, and you don't know what their abilities are. And I don't know if you've experienced this, Eric, but you ask somebody, listen, I need you to put your meter lead here and here. And they're like, I know what I'm doing. Just tell me what you want me to check. And I'm like, okay, but the last reading you gave me makes no sense. So I'm trying to be very specific, because you're only as good as the guy on the other end of the phone holding the instruments. You can only do as good as that guy is. It's a real challenge. Sometimes people get angry at you. You're trying to help them. When you're getting angry, sometimes they think you got a crystal ball, and we don't. And that's why a lot of people don't stay in it. It's a rough road to hoe. But at the end of the day, I made friends with a lot of dealers, especially the owners, that were thankful that we helped them out. And it was rewarding in that sense.
One of the hardest for me was when you get the call as they're driving to the job, wondering what's going on with it. And they haven't even been there and looked at it yet to get any data to try to help you out to figure out what it is. And that was always a hard one for me to answer.
I can't tell you how many times that happened. Yeah, I'm going to this job, and they said, this is the problem. What should I be looking for? Or they call you from the job, and you're like, okay, well, does it have any codes on that board? Like, I never forget one. They called me from a variable speed heat pump, York's top of the line, and it's a very sophisticated piece of equipment. And I'm like, okay, well, look at the screen and tell me if you see any codes on there. Does it have the smiley? They had a smiley and frowny face. I don't know if you guys ever seen the York one. And, well, I don't know. Why? Well, I haven't taken the cover off yet. Like, you couldn't at least take the cover off. You got there, stood in front of the unit, and called us. There's been times that we would just tell guys, like, look, here's the things that you need to be looking for and you need to do. And if you get through this and you don't find the issue, call me back. But I just literally can't sit here and wait for you to take each panel off and do those kind of things. And so it's about time management. It's about trying to manage the people who are calling you in. There's a lot of managing going on. and it could be fun for sure.
I have this thought that not everyone may appreciate that HVAC, the equipment in most cases, is not delivered plug and play. There has to be this engagement and involvement from the person that's specified that it goes in to how it gets connected to the box, not to the box, but to the structure, to the environment it's in, and then also how it's installed and maintained. Do you think people appreciate that, to understand like all those connections and there's this shared responsibility?
I wish they did. I'm trying to promote that. If I had a nickel for every time somebody called in and we're asking about the airflow, and it's like, well, that was set from the factory. If I got a nickel for every time I had that, I'd have $185.45. And we explained and what blows my mind is commercial equipment. These guys are sitting there setting a 15-ton rooftop and they're having issues, and we're asking them, did you adjust the airflow? What did you set it at? What was your dry static across the coil? And they're like, I don't know. It's set from the factory, right? I'm like, okay, the unit you got is a high static unit, number one. Did you set it on an adapter curve? Because if you didn't, I guarantee you got too much air, right? Because that's what it was built for. And just the amount of times that you get that, it's both residential and commercial. I find that both are equal offenders in that. Because I don't know about your all's experience, but we always had the commercial guys ragging on the res guys and the res guys ragging on the commercial guys. And they're all inherently the same in that. And I think that so often, especially HVAC contractors now want stuff to be plug and play because they don't want to have to learn how to do it. They don't want to have to set it up. And the problem is, and so I've been working on a dialogue for one of the podcasts about the systemic problem that causes poor quality. The systemic problem being it starts in the office. We think about the installer not doing his job. But a lot of times I'll ask an installer, so how many CFM per ton are you looking for? Or how much did you set it for? They don't even know what nominal CFM per ton is. So there's such a disconnect. They know how to put a Romex wire connector in. They know how to sweat the pipes in. They know how to pressure test. Dare I say, some can pull a decent vacuum and weigh the charge in. But understanding the setup, understanding what it is that you're trying to achieve. But then part of that bigger systemic problem is we have comfort advisors. And they go out there and they're talking to the end user and they want to address the end user's needs. And so they're selling a system that can promise better dehumidification or whatever the case may be. But then nobody sets the standard and say, okay, well, this is the system we're selling. Here's exactly how I want the airflow set. This is the way you need to set this up. That never gets sent to the installer. He has no idea. And whatever airflow is, how many times you've seen a furnace that had a blower drive capable of 1,200 CFM, yet you got a 2-ton condenser or heat pump connected to it, and the nominal airflow is going to be that 3 tons worth of air. So we see these things all the time, but it's a bigger problem than just an installer not setting it up right. In my estimation, from what I've seen over the years, it's just too often either they don't know their men well enough to know that they don't know, and that's a problem, or somebody on the front end is not doing their jobs. And then all too often, even in the sales process, and I know I'm going all over the place here, but even too often in the sales process, nobody's outlining expectations. And you know what I find is if you don't outline expectations, it doesn't mean the homeowner will not have them. They will have them. It's just that you didn't understand what they were. And since you didn't do a good job on that end, now the homeowner's expecting this thing to cook popcorn and to wake them up. It's got an alarm attached to it, the weather bugs on it. It's just they're expecting all these things to happen that the system can't do, or they didn't at least sell a system that could do it. So now we're trying to manage it after the fact, and that becomes the real frustrating part.
It sounds like you've started into this role of consulting in training and education and helping people because you feel like you can break that cycle of frustration that you've experienced. And also maybe people haven't actually noticed what is causing the frustration. You've taken a philosophical approach and stepped way back from the problem. Do you see where the lines are connected or disconnected?
Yeah, so because a lot of times you get called out to the job site and you're out on the site and you're there, and sometimes you'll have the owner or the service manager and you'll have the installer, and I watch them argue back and forth. Well, you didn't tell me that. You kind of almost get caught in the crossfire and you're back and forth and you're looking, and we're like, I know where the problem is. Not only that, in the OEM world, you spend a lot of time, especially when there's equipment issues. And listen, every brand is going to have an issue from time to time. It's just the way it is. I get so tired of hearing dealers say, well, they didn't really test the system out. A lot more testing goes in than you know. But the fact is they don't test it how to install it wrong. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, they're only going to test it as it should be installed.
As it should be installed. As the installation instructions are written. That's how they install it. Now, they'll put it on shaker tables and do all that crazy nonsense, but they're not testing it for undersized line set. Just all the different things that we do are no evacuation or poor evacuation, not having the correct charge, not having the correct air. They don't test for those things that are just simply done in the field all the time. But if you're ever involved in OEM stuff, root cause becomes a big thing, getting to the root cause. And all too often we point to an individual, such as an installer, like Bob. Billy Bob didn't put it in right, or Bubba, whoever did the install. It's his fault. Well, when you realize that Bubba's never been taught how to read a blower table in his life, he just knows how to connect that sheet metal to that box, how to wire that box up and fire that box off. That's what he knows. And so are we really going to blame Bubba for what he doesn't know? Now, listen, Bubba could take a hold of his own education and run with it, but a lot don't. But a lot of people don't know their own men. And I've literally been on the job sites where they're arguing back and forth and whose fault it is. And I'm just looking at them like, it starts with the owner. And that's who I end up talking to. Like, look, I can't go in here and take a hit for what was done here. You guys are going to need to fess up to these homeowners. This is not a brand issue. And the brand is blamed a lot, all too often. And I can tell you all the times I've been on job sites, it's rarely the issue.
In this new role you've taken on, or your new approach to things, I understand you've gotten some training and you're continuing to absorb more and expand your horizon. Can you talk a little bit about that?
And I'm expanding kind of in a couple ways. I've been so in tune to what's going on in the box, so in tune to the refrigeration circuit, all those things that we teach constantly and what's going on in the box, that even though I was a mechanical contractor, I worked for Whitman Mechanical for many years, and they did both new construction and add-on replacement. So I was exposed to both, been around a lot of both, and understand the envelope and how houses are built and those things. And I've been involved in when there's problems with the envelope. I've been involved in those. But when you kind of are away from that world and you just been focused on something for 17 years, you tend to, if you use it or lose it. And so now I've been started on this journey with BPI. So now I want to go as far as I can as time will allow in that process to learn more about the whole system. When I mean the whole system, not just the HVAC, but just the envelope and everything as a whole. Because there's been many times I've been on the job site where I've proven to them that the equipment does what it's supposed to do. So there are published capacities, and an OEM is always going to go to that. And they're going to say, okay, here's the published capacity. And if it wasn't making capacity, are there things that are causing that, such as airflow charge, all those things? And we help them get them corrected. And once we correct them, then we test out again and say, okay, now that we made the corrections, now we're meeting capacity. But we know the homeowner was not comfortable in any way. We know that there was a moisture problem or whatever the case may be, but we could never address it. I couldn't make those suggestions. The factory would always be like, you don't make those suggestions because then you're on the hook for it. And if they spend all this money to do that and the issue is still not resolved, then they want to come back and they're going to want us to pay for that stuff. So we always just concentrate on the box. But we all have seen it. We've all been involved in it where we're out on the site. The equipment does what it's supposed to do, but it's not cycling on because it's been oversized or they got a huge amount of moisture coming in. I went on one where it was a Carrier Infinity system. I don't know if you know much about the Carrier Infinity or Bryan Evolution systems, but that controller, you can actually set a humidity target and it will go down as low as, with two-stage equipment, it would go down as low as 175 CFM a ton on low stage. And it would extend its runtime because the controller makes the decision on what CFM based on the humidity demand. So when you set it up the right way. And so he bought and purchased this Infinity system from a dealer, and it was not dehumidifying the home. You could walk in this house and you're like, whew, feel like you could just feel it. And so the dealer's like, I've done everything I could do. The equipment's running good and all this stuff. And we literally walked downstairs and he had open Crocs in this unfinished basement with standing water in them. And I'm like, that's a problem.
That equipment won't take that out.
No, not to mention the ductwork. There was a water outline of the duct design on the basement floor because the water was just dripping out of these things, right? Just, oh man, I forget how high the dew point was. It was just terrible. And I looked at him, I'm like, you've got a water problem. When we think about dehumidification, it's kind of a byproduct of air conditioning that we can tailor things to get the best out of it, play with that sensible latent load and just some airflow to try to maximize, that seesaw effect to get the best of both worlds if we can. It's not going to fix this. Well, it turns out he had estimates from 4 other HVAC contractors who actually told him he needed like an April Air 1700 dehumidifier or something like that. He needed air conditioning was not going to fix this problem. So 4 dealers told him that. But the 5th dealer walked in there having attended a class and understood how well the Infinity system dehumidifies. He thought he had the answer. And it was unfortunate for the homeowner, and I helped smooth things over a little bit. And he knew he needed to back up and punt a little, but the dealer had to give a little skin in the game to help. But just all too often, there's other problems. I want to be able to address the whole problem and not concentrate on the box as much as I have been in the past. So it's a new world for me. And I love listening to your all's podcast. I learn a lot. It makes me hungry for more, honestly. So I've been starting digging in on this stuff.
I think we mentioned already, you do your own YouTube channel, HVAC Talk with Huff. And I'm looking at the episodes here. And one of them was interesting, making the most out of your call to tech support. That's a really interesting topic to cover because you can actually bridge that. You've been on both sides of that bridge. Can you explain a little bit about the essence of what that video was about?
Thank you. Yeah, and I've only got a few episodes and I just started. It's new to me, but I feel I can say stuff now I couldn't say before. So that's the bridging.
I'm free.
Yeah, it is. And it's nothing bad. I don't have anything bad to say about anybody. We can do better. It's just that. But that particular episode and that particular topic is all too often people call in. One of my pet peeves was people would call in, I'm working on one of your units. I'm like, I looked outside and you ain't nobody in front of my unit. It's not my unit you're working on. You're working on it in front of a unit or a brand that I help support. So let's get that. We didn't install it. You did. Let's understand who owns ownership here. I wouldn't get into a big conversation, but it was just one of my pet peeves. But anyway, people call out, I'm working on your equipment. And one of the things that I have people just often were like, well, Carrier or we're York, they tell you guys what to do. They give you all that training. You guys should know this stuff inside and out. And I'm like, the only thing the OEMs would ever do for you would they give you updates if they found a problem. If they found a problem, they're like, hey, we're going to put a bulletin out. They give you a heads up. And sometimes once a year, if the budget didn't get blown, the salespeople really knocked it home and the money was there, they let us have a meeting, regional or a national meeting. There were often years where things were lean and we didn't get to meet at all. And so they don't realize that these are just technicians who've been in the field, done what they've done, they've learned, and they've excelled. And they're now on this side using their experience to help people. And I think that's one of the things people understand. It's not like calling Dell. Did you turn it off, turn it back on? Did you unplug it for 10 seconds? You're not calling somewhere else while somebody reads a script to you. We're literally technicians. So think about that when you call because that's kind of an important aspect. You're just talking to another technician who's trying to help you. And also, we're only as good as the information given. So in tech support, you learn to ask different questions. Like, for instance, I asked a guy one time, do you have 24 volts between R and C? This was a simple heat pump, Payne heat pump. Wasn't even one a nice model. It was just stripped down Payne heat pump. And it would not go into defrost. The unit would run in heat, but would not go into defrost. It wouldn't, when you hit the test pins, it just wouldn't defrost. And so I asked the question, do you have 24 volts between R and C? Yes, I do. Are you sure? Absolutely. So I agreed to go out to the job. Now, I'll never forget this job because when I went out there, Bill, it was like 18 degrees outside that day. And it was unseasonably cold for our area. We don't get that cold where I'm from here. I remember going out there and when you haven't been in the field for a while, you're, honey, where did I put my long johns? This is going to be a terrible day. I remember being bundled up, looking like that kid from Christmas Story, walking out, and we get out there in front of the unit and it takes the panel off. And I said, let's start with this. Let's take our meter and go from R to C. And I wanted to confirm it. 0 volts. I thought you said you had voltage here. The unit was running. I had to have voltage there. I'm like, you don't need voltage on between the R to C for this thing to run. He didn't understand that the R was powering the logic of the board. So for what I did at that moment, because there was a crawl space and the air handler was on a crawl space and I was not about to go there. And so I just literally took the Y call that was obviously still there and the unit was running. I just took R and jumped it over there and tied them together so that it had now the logic of the board had power and hit the test pins and thing goes into defrost. Well, I learned a lesson that day. I don't ask if you have 24 volts anywhere. I ask you to take your meter and measure between R and C and tell me exactly how many volts you are. And I say this, and how many is important. So give me the exact number. I make them think that they got to be dead on with this thing. That way I know they're measuring it. Little things like that. Now, it's a long story to tell that thing, but that's just a little small sliver kind of thing that you learn over time to ask different questions and ask leading questions instead of yes or no, so that you can get better information out. But the problem is people don't realize that we're only as good in tech support as the guy that's using the instruments. If he doesn't know where to place them, if he doesn't listen to the person on the phone, if he gets offended that you're giving him simple instructions, you're just not going to have a good experience, and it's not the fault of the guy on the phone trying to help you.
Yeah, it's got to be a mutual openness to the conversation. You mentioned measure and tell me the voltage. How about that platform called MeasureQuick?
Our good friends. I don't know if he likes me telling the stories. I met Jim when he was with Imperial.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I literally still have 2 eye manifolds. I blame Jim for them. I got a bad back already. I've had 3 spinal surgeries, and I still carry around an eye manifold from time to time. Lord knows you can't kill them. So I met Jim with Imperial, and he impressed me because the first we got talking, and I forget how we got talked about psychrometrics, and Jim breaks out a cardboard sleeve that he had made. And he pulled out this old psychrometric chart that looked like Willis Carrier gave it to him. I forget what the date was. It was really old. He's like, look at this. This is one of my pride. And he was telling me about the picture that he found. Was it on eBay or something like that? And we just instantly had a connection there. But if you look at what he was doing there, the transition to MeasureQuick all makes sense. I'll just leave it at that. But I was an early adopter there because the whole idea behind that, even at Imperial, was not to sell this. It's not necessarily for a technician to really buy into. It's for a company to buy into. And to be able to take your worst technician and bring him up to the level of your best one. And even the playing field using technology. And then when he developed MeasureQuick, and I'll tell you, I know I probably wasn't the first one to get on it, but I was got to be close. I've believed in the product from the very beginning. I tried to get him involved when I was a carrier. I had him come down and speak at a regional meeting in Virginia Beach. People were impressed, but I just don't know if anything materialized out of that. Then I went to York, and we got in contact again. We were trying to do something with him tying in with York's app, but somehow that fell through. But I'm a huge fan. If you're not measuring, you're guessing. That's his words. I'm a huge fan for a lot of reasons. I helped take Whitman Mechanical through a program through National Association of Home Builders, the NHQ program, National Home Quality. And it was based on the ISO 9000 principles, but they took those principles and they applied it to construction kind of thing. And I don't know if you know much about those principles, but it's really about defining exactly how you want things done and then doing it and then check and make sure it got done and then spot checking after that. And so I took that company through that program and it just all made sense to me. So what we did and how we got the buy-in is I took the best guys. Your best guys are always complaining about the lazy guys. It's just the way it works. You got a guy here busting his hump, doing the best work possible. And then he goes on to a job and sees stuff just done, just willy-nilly, halfway, looking like they threw that ductwork in from the street. And it aggravates them because they take the time to do it right. And you're paying these guys near the same amount of money that I make. And so what we did is we took our best guys and we sat down with them. We're like, we're writing a standard for this program and we want you to be the standard and we want you to help. I want to bring everybody else up to your level. And man, they ate that up and it really worked well. And honestly, I see MeasureQuick with that. We're able to teach them a process. I love the guided workflows. I just took 2 young men, never done heat and air conditioning in their life. They've been with me for 2 months and made them walk through now after I've obviously been teaching them almost every day for 3 days a week, made them go through the guided workflows, each one by themselves. And it's amazing how they were just able to follow it now because they've learned these functions, but now it helps just put it together. And when they got done, they ended up with the same results that I had done when I did it. How great is that? I've been doing this 32 years. They've been doing it 2 months and they were able to spit out the same report with the same results that I got. Yes, I taught them where to place the pros, but that's the beauty of it.
So in that way, it makes me think like MeasureQuick is a data tool.
Oh, very much so.
So of course, you need a multimeter to make that voltage measurement. You can't do it physically with your own person or with your eyes. But then what do you do with the data? And I think a lot of people maybe feel they can process the data in their minds. When you have a system like MeasureQuick, that's a data tool, really. What it does is it brings the data to life and helps you with that, especially in terms of the guided workflows. Do you have people that ever say to you, hey, but this is going to take more time?
They do. I just want to tail off one thing you said real quick before we go into that about the data. So I can't tell you how many times I've begged dealers for the data. They had a compressor fail in month 2 and they want help with it. And give me the startup data so that I know that the system was running correctly, and they don't have it. They either didn't do it correctly or they didn't record it. But oftentimes if we can get the data, even if they don't understand it,
yeah,
we do. and we can help them. Matter of fact, I talked to Jim on Saturday about a job that they were having issues with, and he asked, because it was an equipment I was familiar with, he sent me the reports, and we're looking at it, and the data tells the story. Even if the people who took the readings don't understand it, it tells the story. So that's important. But so about the time, how is it that people don't have time to do it right, but they got time to go back? When you think about callbacks, and now that's why it goes back, a lot of this problem is a systemic problem that starts with management. Because we get pushed. I hear dealers all the time. I couldn't get that information, man. They were pushing me to get to the next job, and I didn't have time to do all that. And okay. But then when it's not right and you're calling me and you're on the job for a third time, maybe it's a time management issue on the front end. Because how can you say you don't have time to do it right, but you got time to go back? And that's just all too often the story that we just hear over and over. I can't tell you how many times. I've had my guy out there 3 times now. We still can't get this right. I need you guys on the job. And a lot of times they hadn't even called us until they were there the third time. Well, if you didn't get it right the first time, you had to go back. You might have at least wanted to call us then. I mean, but just because you've been there 3 times, just the first time you called me, and now I'm supposed to just leave my office and come out there. And well, he's one of my good guys.
You would suggest to business owners or supervisors to be tracking this data about callbacks. That measurement will help you look for solving these systemic problems that you talk about. And if you aren't doing that, it may even be hard to implement a fix because you don't know where to plug it in. Is that true?
Absolutely. All too often, we don't see people tracking those metrics, right? Now, I will tell you, with the advent of new software like Service Titan and Field Edge and things like that, I think it's getting better. I'm helping that company down in Sterling we built the lab for, and been building them a training program that they can follow, and they use the software. And I'm like, I want to see your non-billable man hours and where they went and what was the problem. Give me the work order numbers. If you want me to help you, let's get down to the bottom of it and figure, again, back to that root cause thing. Root cause is just not, well, he forgot to land this wire or didn't get the charge right, or that's not the root cause. Root cause is deeper than that. But a lot of dealers aren't tracking those metrics. A lot of people are still out here doing like hand tickets. And even if they are using software, they're not thinking about how they can actually make better use of their machine, so to speak.
Yeah, the whole machine is the business people.
Yeah, you got a lot of cogs in these wheels going on, and they just the squeaky one is the one that they deal with, not realizing that's caused by something else. So if dealers aren't tracking their callbacks and to get to why, then they're never going to get down to the root of what's really going on. And they're going to stay in that downward spiral, or at least that insane spiral, continuing to do the same things and just getting the same results time after time. And they're wanting somebody else to fix it. And that's just not going to happen that way.
I don't remember where I heard this. It might have been way back when I was in quality control at Eastman Kodak, but there's this notion of asking why 5 times. And once you do that, you usually do end up somewhere within that sequence, you end up at the root cause, if you take that with sincerity.
What's interesting, too, is when I was at Carrier, well, at this point, I had transitioned to CE, Carrier Enterprise, because I've always done tech support at the distribution level, which is where the heart of it is. And we have factory reps that we would call if we had an issue and we needed them to kick in more money or something. But I developed a consulting program while I was there that they let me run for a while until I left. And it was to help the dealers, and they allowed them to use their marketing funds to pay for the cost of it. And I would go in. The first thing I would do was interview the service department heads, the service manager, if they had a dispatcher, anybody involved in the management of the team. And one of the things I would ask them, like, so what is your protocol to address callbacks? If you get a callback, what is your protocol? You're like, what? Protocol. You got to have a way you address this. You got to have a specific way. Well, it depends. It depends on what. And so it's amazing how they didn't have protocols in place. A lot of times, if it was a new install, they would send the same installer back. If it was a service call that was a callback from a previous service call, they would send the same service guy back instead of maybe getting a different set of eyes. They just didn't have a way of dealing with that. And I'm like, well, do you track it? And again, big goose egg a lot of times with that. And so not tracking it, not having a plan how to deal with it just ensures that it's just going to continue. So that was one of the things we really tried to help them with and get them to understand the cost of a callback, because it's not just the man hours, it's the lost revenue that goes along with that. And so if you add all that up, so if you just take 2 hours additional on a job that they had to go back, that's an hour travel and an hour on the job. If you just take that and you look at that, your overhead and the cost of your man being out there, And then you look at 2 hours of additional revenue, not even thinking that you may end up with an equipment sale out of the next call. But if you just take 2 hours of additional revenue and tack onto that, then you realize the numbers start to say, whoa, man, this callback's costing me a lot. We're not even adding in what happens to your reputation, what happens to your friends. The marketing people will all tell you. Most people, they don't go around telling people. I had a service call the other day with my HVAC systems and it went well. It worked. The guy knew what he was doing. Nobody says that. But you let a guy foul up and do something stupid. And they're telling everybody. But I think I wasn't a mechanical contractor back in the days now that with social media. Thank God we didn't have that back then. But it makes it even more difficult. What happens to your reputation, all these things that also goes along with that. People will tell what happened to them that was bad way before they tell you something that was either normal or good. John Whitman told me something really important one day. He said, Huff, it's how we deal with our mess ups that makes a difference. That's what separates us from the rest. It's if we make a mistake, how we own it, take care of it. It's going to separate us. He said, because if we install a system and it works according to how it was designed, don't expect anybody to send you a birthday card. He said, you know why? Because that's what they paid for. They got what they paid for. You did your job. When we give you a Burger King crown for the day or something, he was a funny guy. He's like, nobody's going to crown you king for a day because you did your darn job. He said, it's how we deal with mistakes. That's going to separate us. That's what people will talk about. Hey, they screwed up, but they owned it. These guys are honest. They have integrity. Call these guys.
So I got a question for you on this subject. What are a few steps that a company should take or some managers should take to help them identify those root causes?
First off, I think they have to look at the call from start to finish. They have to look at not only who was on the job, what the mistake was, what the callback was, but how did that progress? I'm not a person who goes here and I don't want to judge everybody's feelings, but was he sent to the job and was the dispatchers pressing them because they had somewhere else to be? Is there more to the story? And I think you really need to sit down and interview each person that was involved, from the person who took the phone call, the person who dispatched the call, what happened while they were on the call. I think all of that needs to be looked at. And too often we just want to smack the hands of the guy who made the mistake. And I think we need to look a little deeper. And it might be a culture problem.
Got to look at the whole system, the whole big picture there.
The whole big picture. Now, a guy shouldn't rush just because he's got another call. But how many of us have had a ball game with their son they want to make? There's been times I was trying to rush because I wanted to get to that ball game because I'd have missed the previous two. Sometimes it just affects you. Or sometimes they're not given all the right information. Or sometimes they're just told to go there and take a look. They don't think there's a problem just to satisfy them. And so they go there half-heartedly. And there's just a lot of things that attribute to how things go on a job. And I think that we need to understand the mindset, what was told, how it was presented to them, and what they did and why they did it. It could be a technician's mistake, sure. But there might be some other contributing factors. And it also, again, could even go to a bigger culture problem where people are continually rushed. They're not allowed to do their jobs correctly, and they're told to do the minimum. So there's a lot of things that can go along with that. So it's not really 3 steps, but that's a whole big step. I just think you got to break it down piece by piece and not just look at the tech himself. You have to look at the other factors that were involved in that process.
So looking through some of these, because I'm going to guess that you've analyzed some of these situations for root cause, do you see any significant trends of common root causes standing out to you?
Lack of fundamental training is huge. I think everybody will agree with that. You hear that all the time. Also, lack of brand training. And the reason I say that is because everybody does it a little different. Yes, fundamentally, refrigeration circuit, it's the same physics. Nobody's got their own physics. Nobody's out there developing their own energy. And so physics is involved in no matter what the brand is, but brands all do things a little bit different. And that's important because today, when you go out there, we got all this communicating equipment and everybody does that a little differently. And there are quirks and different things that different brands want you to do, whether it's going into a charging screen because they want a specific RPM when you're checking the charge on maybe a modulating piece of equipment. Maybe airflows are set differently. There's just a lot of variables there. And what I've seen both from the carrier and York side was a lot of dealers will send one tech to a training to get certified on a line of equipment, whether it be an Infinity line or a York's HX or whatever. They send one person to go so that they quote unquote get the certification so that they could sell that line of equipment. But that person doesn't train anybody else. And that person is usually not the one out on the job when there's something wrong. Somebody else is calling in and they don't even know how to get into the installer menu. They have no clue. And it just costs the dealer a lot of money. And of course, they call in a tech support frustrated. And so lack of fundamental training, lack of brand training to understand the equipment that they're actually putting in. Those are two of the biggest things on my radar that I see just that was a continual problem. And of course, do we put airflow in its own category? Maybe. I think we should sometimes.
From my technical support experience, airflow was probably one of the biggest trouble spots that technicians had measuring or figuring out how to. And I think you're right. There's a lack of training on that. And a lot of them didn't have the proper tools. We sell a lot of tools at TrueTech Tools, and we still don't have a handometer anywhere on our website that I've seen.
I love that. Use the old handometer. Oh, it's got good heat. It's got good heat. It's good. It's good. I just categorize airflow as its own thing sometimes, but fundamental training, and I just put airflow off by itself because when I say airflow training, there's just so much involved in that. So the measuring of it, understanding what it needs to be. It's not just a measuring. They don't even know what it's supposed to be. That's problematic as well.
Yeah, and that goes back to a fundamental design piece, which things have to be designed for the structure that it's going into and selected.
Yep.
So I think we're getting ready to wrap things up here. We've spent a lot of time today talking about a lot of different things. Have you got any last thoughts or wisdom for our listeners?
First off is I tell technicians all the time, and if you're a technician out there, own your own education. Don't wait for somebody to tell you. We have so many avenues and ways to learn, and I'm talking about really good. When I think about some of the podcasts and stuff that are out there, Brian Orr with the HVAC School and Craig with AC Service Tech and the MeasureQuick videos and what you guys are doing, there's just so much out there that are really good material that if you're waiting for your boss to send you to a class, then you're going to always be lacking. So own your own education, take advantage of all the tools that are available and learn, dig in, buy some books. Psychometrics Without Tears. You got to love Eugene Silverstein. So there's just all this information out there that's available. So go out and get that. And secondly is always make sure you're using the best tool you can afford. Not the best tool that you can buy, the best tool that you can afford, right? Guys that are young in the business or gals that are young in the business may not be able to own that top of the line, but just get the best that you can afford and you learn how to use it and use it right. And if you don't understand, ask somebody. I will tell you, I would rather have someone call in and say, man, I need to check airflow and I don't even know where to put this probe at. Man, you would love that.
That would be an awesome question saying, hey, I don't know how to do this. Help me. And I'll say too, learn the limitations of your tools and what they can't do. Because that's one of the things that I see with people using tools is they're trying to do things with them that they're not designed to do. They weren't designed to figure that out. Don't try to use a tool for something it can't be done, or especially an instrument to measure things that it wasn't designed to measure. That can lead you down to some really, I won't say bad roads, but it leads you down roads where you're getting data that's not accurate or not applicable.
You're saying a pocket thermometer and a wire tie is not a clamp?
Not last I checked, no.
Thank you so much for TrueTech Tools. Listen, I send the guys there all the time. I'm like, there's such a wide array of affordable tools, but also some great, elaborate, just wonderful instruments. And last time I was up your all's way was in July, and I come home with a True Grid. So.
Yeah, that TrueFlow grid. Walking into our warehouse is dangerous for people like you and I.
Oh, my goodness. And it's like I had to go back. I was up there. I took my motorhome up. I stayed not too far away. When I come back to the motorhome with this big box, my wife's like, what is that? I'm like, how much was it? We don't want to have that conversation. We'll talk about that when we get home.
It'll pay for itself in short order.
Yes, very much so. But let me tell you a funny story real quick. I called up there because I was looking for the battery cover on my sonic leak detector. And I don't know if I called or emailed. I think I called. Somehow, Billy Spohn is who I ended up with. And this is what he did for me. He says, we don't sell that battery cover by itself. I can't find a part number for that. But we had one to come back that was bad, and the battery cover's good. How about I just send it to you? That's service. That is service.
We try. That's something we try to do because we understand we got to take care of customers and make sure that our customers have the right things to do the right jobs.
Thank you guys for what you do. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you for coming on today. We really appreciate this. I'm sure we'll be talking soon again in the future.
Thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tom. Really appreciate you listening all the way through to the end of this podcast. The Building HVAC Science Podcast is a production of True Tech Tools Limited. And full disclosure, I am an owner of True Tech Tools. The opinions here voiced are those of my guests, my co-host, or myself, depending on who's speaking, of course. You can follow us on any of the typical podcast apps, or even ask Alexa for the Building HVAC Science Podcast. Got a lot of great HVAC trade-related resources out there. Huff mentions a few of them today, but I'll cover my list of the go-to ones: Tool Pros, Service Business Mastery, Quality HVAC, HVAC Overtime, HVACR Videos, the HVAC Grapevine, HomeDiagnosis.tv, AC Service Tech, MeasureQuick, HVACX, The Misfits of HVAC, HVACR School, HVAC Shop Talk, Stephen Reardon, HVAC Reefer Guy, Tool Pros, Service Business Mastery, and Quality HVAC. I think I overlapped that list, but some of them you can't stress enough. Any case, we love when you listen and give us feedback. You can drop us a line at marketing@truetechtools.com, TRUTECHTOOLS.com. And if you're in the market for any products mentioned in our podcast or things that you're interested, tools and test instruments for HVAC and building performance, you can look at our website, truetechtools.com, TRUTECHTOOLS.com, and you can use the offer code HVACBS, for a nice discount. I want to thank you again for listening to this episode of the Building HVAC Science Podcast. See, that's an awful lot to say. It's a mouthful, but we think it's important. Until next time, we hope you do well, and you come back and listen again to the HVAC. There we go again. The Building HVAC Science Podcast. I'm a little confused today. Maybe I'll be better tomorrow. Take care.